Nürburgring lap times have long been the gold standard for gauging a supercar's all-out performance. And there is an incredible amount of emphasis that gets put on what lap time a car is able to set, which is why it's such a big deal that the Carrera GT was just retested with a set of modern tires, and it managed to beat its original time by nearly 16 seconds. Which does tell us, yes, modern tires do make older cars faster, but I think it leads to more questions than it gives us answers. Like, if tires are making this much of a difference, what would other older supercars be able to achieve on modern rubber? And what do we consider to be the official Carrera GT lap time? The slower time that was set 20 years ago, or the newer, faster time that is just because of a new set of tires? And I think the question at the heart of all of this is just, are lap times the correct measure to gauge performance? All right, now as we get into this, I'm just gonna let the video roll. This is the official onboard footage from Jörg Bergmeister driving the Carrera GT on the new tires around the Nürburgring. It is truly impressive. So, to kick off this discussion, it is no secret that both enthusiasts and manufacturers put a tremendous amount of emphasis on lap times. And that's because at the most basic level, lap times are a tool for comparison. Manufacturers spend tens of millions of dollars to pack as much performance into their cars as possible. And we have a lot of different tools to measure this performance. Whether it is a 0 to 60 acceleration test, a 60 to 0 braking test, or measuring lateral Gs while cornering. But the one measure that is able to tie all of these different components together is how fast a car is able to get around a racetrack. And from the manufacturer's perspective, this can be tremendously helpful for selling cars. They can tell the general public that they added horsepower or redesigned suspension components, but until there is hard data to back that up, it's kind of just like hearsay. Many manufacturers will spend millions of R&D dollars fine-tuning their cars at racetracks to assure they are capable of achieving the fastest times possible. And when the time comes for that car to set an official lap time, often there is a factory racing driver there to conduct the test. And in terms of lap times, the ultimate proving ground is the Nürburgring Nordschleife circuit in Germany. It is nearly 13 miles long and is an extremely challenging racetrack that is capable of putting both the car and the driver through their paces. It features both high-speed straights as well as tight technical sections, and you combine that with a ton of elevation changes and a racetrack surface that is often uneven and bumpy, and it is an excellent way to evaluate a performance car. And the car in question today is the Porsche Carrera GT. Now, if you're watching this video, you are probably already well aware of what this car is, but just as a quick refresher, the Carrera GT was kind of like Porsche's hypercar from the early 2000s before we even really started using that term. It features an F1-derived 5.7 liter V10 that makes over 600 horsepower. It was only offered with a 6-speed manual transmission. In addition to that, it had a carbon fiber monocoque, which had great chassis rigidity, but also provided a low curb weight of around 3,000 pounds. And obviously, Porsche has a very rich history in motorsport and is able to distill a lot of that into their performance cars. So by all objective measures, the Carrera GT is an incredible performance vehicle. And it's also exceedingly rare as well, with Porsche only producing around 1,270 units, and even less of those are surviving as of today. And what I mean by that is, with the Carrera GT, there have been a series of very high-profile crashes. And the first one to come to mind here is the Paul Walker crash, which resulted in his family suing Porsche and kind of questioning the safety of the Carrera GT. But beyond just that, there have been just a series of incidents in pop culture that have built up this reputation of the Carrera GT being incredibly difficult to drive. And to some extent, this is justified. this car does lack a lot of the driver assist features that we've come to expect on modern day supercars. While it has a very primitive traction control system, it has no electronic stability control to speak of. And there are really two main reasons for this. The first is just kind of the technology that was available at the time in the early 2000s when this car was being developed. And the other is just the purpose of this car. It is intended to be a focused driver's car. There used to kind of be like a baseline assumption that if you are buying a car like this, that you have an adequate amount of skill to be able to actually drive it, which is great for hardcore car enthusiasts who want a nanny-free driving experience, but it isn't necessarily great for making that power accessible to the people that actually bought these cars. Because again, it is sending over 600 horsepower through a manual transmission to the rear tires. And while I have never driven a Carrera GT myself, and I pray that one day I am granted that privilege, most of the journalists who have gotten an opportunity to drive this car and compare it against other supercars, they have largely said that the handling characteristics are just kind of sketchy. So all of this combines to just kind of give the car this reputation of being difficult to drive. But to be clear here, difficult to drive does not mean slow. In the correct hands, the Carrera GT is an incredibly fast car. Back in 2004, when it first set its Nürburgring lap record, it achieved a time of 7 minutes and 28 seconds. Even now, in 2025, that is incredibly fast. Although it does fall just a little bit short of what the modern day supercars and hypercars are able to achieve. So I think that kind of leads to the question, why is that? We know over the past 20 years, performance cars have only continued to evolve, but what specifically has changed? Well, the most obvious answer is power. There have just been a ton of advancements with internal combustion engines, as well as the proliferation of forced induction has just meant that power is just a lot more accessible. And at the same time, dual clutch transmissions have come to dominate the high performance segment, not only allowing for quicker shifts and faster acceleration, but just more control over gear selection and keeping the engine in its power band. And there have also been advancements with things like suspension and brakes, with the suspension allowing for better weight distribution, helping to maintain traction, and better brakes, just more stopping power and resisting brake fade. And with many high performance cars, we have also seen a very strong embrace of aggressive aerodynamics, where in the past, aggressive aero was really just reserved for race cars, but nowadays a lot of the top supercars are putting a tremendous amount of emphasis onto their aerodynamic features that help provide downforce and grip through high-speed cornering. And the last major advancement that we will touch on is simply tire technology. Today's tires hold up better under high-performance driving, and they just flatly provide more grip. This is due to advancements in both tire compounds as well as tread patterns. And tires are unique in this list because they are a wear item that can pretty easily be replaced. With a Carrera GT, realistically, nobody is going to be modifying the engine extensively to get more power out of it, and a swap to a dual clutch transmission is completely out of the question. There are some common aftermarket suspension upgrades that people have done to their cars, but nothing that is officially sanctioned by Porsche. And it is also unlikely that anybody is going to be making significant aerodynamic upgrades to their Carrera GT. Now, if we go back to the reputation of this car for having challenging handling characteristics, I think a lot of that can be attributed to the tires. I just think the chassis and the powertrain were capable of so much more than what the tires could handle in the early 2000s. So as these cars aged, they really didn't get driven a ton, and Porsche never officially sanctioned a replacement tire, which meant in 2023, 2024, a lot of these Carrera GTs were still sitting with their original tires, which is not ideal because while these tires may not have been well suited to the car when they were new, they are even less so when they are 20 years old and dry rotted. And from Porsche's perspective, they have an incentive to show enthusiasts that they are still supporting some of their older models. So the decision was made by Porsche to issue a recall for all of the Carrera GTs that were sold in North America for a miscellaneous suspension component. And while those cars were in the shop, Porsche offered to replace all 4 tires with an official Porsche sanctioned replacement for free. And realistically, this was basically just an excuse by Porsche to replace all of the Carrera GT tires with a new set of Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2s. So equipped with these new tires, the German automotive magazine Sport Auto took the Carrera GT and a professional racing driver back to the Nürburgring to see what the Carrera GT is capable of on modern rubber. And piloted by Jörg Bergmeister, who is a Porsche factory racing driver, the Carrera GT set a time of 7 minutes and 12 seconds, shaving nearly 16 seconds off of its original time. And that makes the Carrera GT faster than the 918 Spider hypercar that came after it, and it also makes it the second fastest production manual transmission car around the Nürburgring after the Dodge Viper ACR. And I think this really highlights 2 things. For one, just how much tire technology has advanced in the last 20 years, but also how ahead of its time the Carrera GT really was. It has a power to weight ratio that is on par with a lot of modern supercars and a superb chassis. But as I mentioned in the intro, I think this kind of opens the door to some more interesting conversations. For one, since these were official Porsche sanctioned tires for the Carrera GT, could we consider this its new official lap time? Because manufacturers are often making adjustments to their cars to run at the Nürburgring, and tires are already a wear item, so this really isn't all that far-fetched. But in my opinion, we really cannot allow that to be the case. When you start allowing manufacturers to stray away from factory equipment, you're kind of giving them a long leash, and they're going to exploit that for all that it's worth, and then we really won't know what cars are truly faster. But more broadly, even if we aren't considering this an official lap time, I am just very curious what other supercars would be capable of achieving on a set of modern tires. That Viper ACR that I just mentioned being faster than the Carrera GT, it in itself is nearly 15 years old, so I would love to see how fast it is on a set of new tires. And same with the 918 Spider. I know because of its hybrid powertrain, we think of that car as being pretty modern, but it came out almost a decade ago. In an ideal world, we would be able to compare all of these different cars on the same exact set of tires, but that's just not realistic. And more broadly, I think that just kind of highlights some of the inherent variability with lap times. In this example we've just been talking through, a simple set of tires constitutes a 16-second difference in lap times. Other factors such as temperature and humidity, differing drivers, or just differing track conditions kind of all play a role in determining lap times. So when we start splitting hairs on lap times by like 1/10 of a second around a 13-mile circuit, I think it's kind of like an exercise in futility. Lap times are great for giving us a general measuring stick to kind of know the delta in performance between different cars, but I think we should always be taking it with a grain of salt.